What's your favorite, oops, I just really screwed up moment? I was a brand new, right out of college computer programmer back before we had software developers. We worked on mini computers at the time, and I had a long process that I needed to run, which tied up my terminal. I went into the storage closet and dragged out another terminal so that I could do stuff while the process ran, an old version of multitasking. You kids have no idea how easy you have it nowadays. Well, because the new kid had two terminals, none of the other programmers wanted to look less productive, so everyone else did that. Then a week or so later, the president of the company came back to the programmer area so he could mess around with some new hardware that came in. He looked around and said, "Looks like everybody has two terminals now." Being a smart one, I quickly quipped, "Well, we all have two hands," which was met with silence. Yeah, usually my quips get at least a chuckle. It was then that I remembered that the president of the company did not, in fact, have two hands. He had a birth defect and one did not develop properly. Yikes. This one reminds me of that Family Guy episode where Peter keeps accidentally insulting a one-legged guy with his small talk. You guys remember that one? Story 2. Somehow when I was in high school, late 90s, everyone who still lived at home at the time had waterbeds, which made moving into a new house a bit of a pain. I remember getting all of the beds set up and having the garden hose in the last one to fill it up. While this is happening, the van with the rest of the house in it arrives and everyone goes to start unloading. No one is watching this last waterbed fill. Several hours later, over pizza, my sister comes into the kitchen and says that the carpet in the hallway is wet, and we all had a collective, really screwed up moment. The bed had overfilled to the point that the fill nozzle was 3 feet over the sides of the frame, the mattress was horribly stretched, the hose had detached and was just dumping onto the floor. It took several hours to shop vac the water out of the carpet, but we were able to deflate and salvage the mattress at least. Story 3. Wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's one that haunts me the most. When I was in college, I used a computer in the school library. They were on these big circular desks with computers all around. It was morning, so I was kind of tired. Some people were on the computers working already. And me being kind of tired still, I sat there, got on a computer, and then I stretched my arms and then stretched my legs out. And unfortunately, the power strip for the computers was near me on my side. And my foot hit the button on the power strip and turned off all the computers on that desk. I don't remember what she looked like, but I still remember the kind of look of quiet anger and frustration of this one girl that was working on a paper, just suddenly losing all her work. She just quietly got up and walked away. I would have felt better if she just stood up and punched me in the face. I would have. Story 4. It was back in my school days when I was around 12, 13. We had an exam and didn't pass it because I was too lazy to study, like most of the time. But this time I actually failed. On the day I got the exam back, I just put it in my backpack and went home. My mom knew I had a test the week before, so she asked me if I'd received the results. Since it was a Friday, I told her, no, not yet, because I wanted to enjoy a nice weekend. She didn't ask any further, so I dropped my bag in my room and had an amazing Friday. The next day, I went out on grocery shopping or something like that with my dad while my mom stayed home to prepare lunch. While she was in the kitchen, she also decided to turn on the dishwasher and went looking for the lunchbox she'd given me for school. It was in my backpack. While looking for the lunchbox, she also found the failed exam. Well, I think you can imagine how thrilled my mom was when I came back home with my dad. Story 5. When I was 19, I was driving my dad's Cherokee in the woods on a 2-track. It wasn't anything too wild, and I knew the way, but I unfortunately hit a stick or a stub or something that popped the tire instantly. I hopped out and looked for a spare, but there wasn't one under the trunk cover. It may have been suspended under the chassis, but I didn't know to look there. I had to call my sick mom and wake her up so she could pick me and my GF up out of the woods. I had to leave the Jeep sitting there. The next day, I rode with our mechanic down the trail so he could tow it out. He had to hop out and use a hatchet to cut out a small tree that was blocking the way of his tall tow truck. He almost threw out his back. I felt like crap just watching him. The tire pop was an accident, but the lesson learned that day was make sure you have a spare and know how to change it. I didn't find a jack either, which made me think there was no spare anywhere. My dad bought it with beefy aftermarket tires, and I'm assuming whoever put those on was too cheap to buy a 5th spare tire. Story 6. A few years ago, I was working at an HMV online warehouse back when CDs and DVDs were still a thing. We had this persistent issue that had been dragging on for months. At one point, some big bosses came for a visit, including the CEO of the entire company. During the visit, one of the floor staff decided to ask the CEO about the issue in front of the entire workforce. He played along and said he'd look into it, which we all knew was unlikely since it was far below his pay grade. Fast forward a few weeks and I was sending yet another email about the same issue. Half jokingly, I added, as CEO's name said, he would look into it. The problem, I wasn't 100% sure how to spell his name, so I started typing it into the CC field to let it auto-populate, thinking I'd delete it after, except I didn't, and then I hit send. So now the CEO had an email from somebody 75 levels below him looking like I was whining and holding him personally accountable for an issue he definitely didn't need to deal with. I imagine he opened that email like, who the heck is this guy? Thankfully, my manager was an absolute legend. After laughing his head off at my expense, he smoothed things over by sending an apology email on my behalf. I'm getting a hot neck just thinking about it. Story 7. So when I was in school, gay was a very popular word to describe things. Most people here will know what I mean when I say it was never said with the intent of, oh, that is homosexual. More of a, oh, that's annoying thing. Not that it makes the use of the word any better, but the intent when I say it is important here. Me and one friend thought we were peak hilarious when we swapped out gay for lesbian when we'd speak like that. Peak 13 to 14-year-old humor. Anyway, one day I was in an argument with my older sister. We'd both use the word gay in the way I described growing up, so in the heat of the moment, I went to say, oh, shut up, gay, jokingly, and instead said, oh, shut up, lesbian, with a bit more venom in the word than I had anticipated. My sister was in a relationship with another woman at the time. Absolute instant regret and horror when I said it. Shock on her face, too. Instantly ended the conversation. It's one of those things that just creeps back into your head every couple of months. I eventually brought it up a year or two back, and she says she has no memory of it, and it's hilarious. That crap stewed in my mind for years, and she didn't care. Story 8. Years ago, when I was an apprentice coachmaker, I was given the job of doing a refurb on a bus in a garage that was the manager's baby and the garage show bus. Got taken along to bus rallies and was in TV appearances, was often seen in the background of UK soap EastEnders. It was on an old Route Master, so I had to redo all the interior flooring as close to the original as possible and replace most of the body panels ready for a shiny new repaint. Because this bus was kept to original, it had quirks that had been modified on others, one of which was a route number display on the offside. I had to change the panel which held the glass in front of the number. So I've cut the panel and made the cutout for the rubber and glass, which involved fitting the glass, realizing it was too tight, removing the glass, trimming the metal back, and repeating, being extremely careful not to make it too loose as there wasn't a lot of leeway with this particular rubber gasket. After several repeats of this procedure, I've taken the glass out and it slipped from my hand. Everything goes into slow motion. I can see this very non-standard glass falling to the floor, knowing it's my manager's baby and he doesn't like me very much anyway. Basically, I'm ready to be sacked. Then lo and behold, the glass hits the floor on its edge and bounces back up into my hand. I grab it between thumb and forefinger and just stand there, stunned looking around to see if anyone else witnessed this moment of complete impossibility. To this day, I haven't a clue how it didn't smash into 1,000 tiny pieces. Story 9. I grew up in a religious and extremely strict house. I was not really ever allowed to hang out or sleep over at people's houses. When I was 16, I made a friend at work and was allowed to hang out with her almost daily, despite my mother not liking her. One day, we started experimenting with me sneaking out to go on adventures with them. They didn't have to sneak out because their parents were awesome. I have 2 stories from this time period. One night, I snuck out at around 10 p.m. after my parents had gone to sleep. At around 10:30, I started to get a weird feeling and asked my friend to drive me home. As I was walking around the back of my house, our normal entrance, I heard the door click locked. My father had woken up and double-checked the locks for no reason, locking me out. I stood there for a minute panicking before accepting my fate. I knocked on the door. He looked at me and said, "Where the hell were you?" To which I replied, "I was looking at the stars from the front porch and I fell asleep. You bought that one." A few weeks later, I snuck out again. It was winter and we were pulling people behind my friend's car at the quarry in town. It was one of our favorite activities and everyone had a lot of fun, no real injuries. It was 1 a.m. when her 94 Geo Prism got stuck on some ice and none of us could get it moving. We had to call her dad and woke her whole family up. He came and picked us up in silence. Luckily, because he knew my mom was cruel, he dropped me off at the top of the street and told me to stop making risky choices while I lived at home. Anyway, 16 was a good year. Story 10. One of my first jobs in journalism was working for a travel magazine. Great job, got to travel quite a lot on my own as both journalist and photographer. One trip sent me to a really nice luxury spa in Switzerland and I used my regular camera to take the photos there. But I also wanted to take some pics of the pool, which was halfway inside outside. So I bought a single-use underwater camera. My professional photographer friends had transitioned to digital already, but I still used film. I changed into my swim trunks and got into the pool, camera in hand. In my mind, I was still looking like a proper media man, but for some reason everyone I asked refused, and quite rude even, me, to take their picture or to be part of the article I told them I made. I was frustrated and a bit surprised that these Swiss people were so negative to a travel journalist. Until I found 3 young boys, I guess around 12 years old. They loved the idea of being part of a travel article. However, I didn't get to take one photo before two angry-looking women dragged them away while looking very harshly at me. Why? What had I done? Then it dawned on me what they saw, a man in trunks with a cheap camera staging as a journalist. I quietly and quickly went to my very luxurious room and stayed there for the rest of the day. Well, at least he had a luxurious room to sulk in. That's the silver lining in this story, right? Story 11. As a brewer, you likely will make this mistake once in your career, but mine happened way later in my career, which makes the screw up a bit more humiliating. I knew better. I was on the overnight shift and doing tank cleans and just finished knocking out a batch into a 1200 BBL fermenter. As I bent down to take the hose off the bottom of the tank, I reached for what I thought was the tri-clamp connecting it to the valve. I reached down and was at an awkward angle, so I turned my head to squeeze in and confidently remove the tri-clamp behind the valve and unleashed a fire hose worth of pressurized beer, all pressing through the 2-inch opening at the bottom. Here's the thing with liquid coming out with that force is as you panic and try to put the valve back on and tri-clamp it to stop the flow, your brain goes into overdrive and all rational thoughts fly out the window. You're getting blasted and struggling to breathe against the rushing beer. People can drown this way. But the way to correct this is to open the valve, then hold the gasket on, stick the open valve back on, and swing a tri-clamp over it, lock it, and close the valve. Nope, you just shut down and do your best for a bit until you remember the correct way to go about it, and by that time, you've dumped 600 to 800 BBLs across the cellar floor. That's what I did. Then you sit there and think about how you're going to wake the brewmaster up at 2 a.m. and let him know you just poured the equivalent of 19,200 cans of beer down the drain. A brewery is a great way to learn about a lot of screw-ups. Myself and watching others included, I have seen some massive screw-ups. Story 12. I had a friend over before his college graduation. He graduated just a year before me, and he brought his brother over. It was intended just to be a chill hangout, but the two got out of control, intoxicated to the point that my best friend and I were terrified, locked ourselves in my bedroom, and barricaded the door by the end of the night. It was bad. We could hear them wrecking the place and retching in the hall outside the bathroom, going from threatening us and banging on my bedroom door to wailing, crying, to laughing and roughhousing with each other. Eventually, they fell asleep. The two woke up with such a hangover they forgot about graduation and started panicking, and I told them they had to clean up all their own mess before they left. He was aghast enough at his own behavior that he did actually stay and clean it. The rest of the place was left in a wreck, but the mess was all cleaned. But yeah, he missed walking at his graduation because he was cleaning his mess off my floor. Story 13. My 3 brothers and I were bored outside of my babysitter's house, waiting for my mom while she chatted with the babysitter. I noticed that one of the trees had some small red berries that were way out of our reach, and we decided to try to get them. Being the problem solvers that we were, we determined that none of us could jump that high, and it was too far to boost our smaller brother. So we looked around and found some yard tools next to the house, a garden rake, and a hoe. We tried for a while with the rake, but the gaps were too large to catch the berries, so we made no progress. Then we tried with the hoe, but it wasn't easy to line up the hoe with the berries when you're standing right beneath them, so I passed the hoe off to my brother and then moved to give better directions. Unfortunately, I moved to be directly in front of my brother, and since he was holding the very bottom of the handle, he was unsteady at best. Long story short, the hoe blade fell straight down. I still have a small scar on the inside of my nose to this day. Story 14. I was newly 17 and driving on my own in the early aughts and had a big boat of a car that was a hand-me-down. It was not the best in the snow, so after a moderate bit of snowfall, like 3 to 4 inches, of course I asked my mom if I could take her minivan. Kind of potato to now that I look back, but the van had ABS and traction control, so of course I'd be much safer driving that. She did not want me to go out at all, and I pleaded, and I begged, and I'd be back earlier than usual, I'd do the dishes, etc., so she relented and I took the van over to my buddy's. He lives on a hill on the side of a mountain, so it's smooth sailing until his driveway. It's about 60 feet long with the beginning sort of running right alongside the road while increasing in elevation, then a sharp 90-degree turn right, more uphill, and then the parking area. I'd done it in my old boat 30 times in snow already. This was not the issue. And I get to the top, the ABS made it even easier than usual, but about 4 people were already parked since everyone had the same idea that I did. So I had to stop right at the precipice of the hill, the front of the car already close to the earlier arrivals, right up in their business. So I get out, there's a greeting congregation, and we all light up cigs and stand around the door just off the parking area. Halfway through the cig, my mom's van starts sliding down the driveway. If you remember, there's about a 30 to 40 feet of hill, then it hits that sharp turn. It instantly looked like it was going to slide through it and ski jump about 20 to 25 feet down to the road below. 2 of my buddies started running after it, but I just stayed still, made peace with my fate, and thought about what to write in my eulogy. They're yelling, sliding, slipping. They barely get to it before it gets to the turn. It slowed down immensely on the flat. The back end turned left with the concave of the worn-down tire marks in the stone, dirt driveway, and the sides of the tires caught traction on the wet, fresh grass full of little sticks and leaves just off the berm, with about 3 feet left before the drop-off. Everyone started laughing hysterically. I said I knew it was going to stop, and the two that chased it roughened me up a little bit. Haven't told anyone that wasn't there, that story, ever. Story 15. As a brand new Army second lieutenant, I sank a brand new Jeep. I was ordered to lead a platoon of tanks to a target area and to use this Jeep without a driver to do so. After 3 miles of trucking along range trails, I came to a ford across the Upatawi Creek at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore. It had rained heavily the night before, and the 40-foot wide, 6 inches deep creek was now about 300 feet wide and of an unknown depth. I sent the tanks across carefully, watching how high the water came up the road wheels, the tracks roll across. It was about 10 to 12 inches. I thought, well, this Jeep can handle that, and waved the tanks on the other side to continue on while I crossed. I entered the creek and immediately started crabbed about 20 to 30 degrees as the Jeep slipped on the gravel underneath because of the current hitting the Jeep's body. I was nervous as a cat on a pool float. I crept across, and when not quite halfway across, the front of the Jeep started dropping into the water. I quickly hit the master switch to stop the engine, stood on my seat, and then, as the Jeep kept sinking, climbed up on the rear corner where the radio shelf mounted. The problem was that I had forgotten about a tank's ability to cross something like a trench on its tracks, and thus the new cut in the bottom of the stream bed wasn't reflected in the depth shown on the road wheels. There I was, standing on the rear corner of a brand new Jeep, 12 miles on it, in the middle of a flooded stream. Only my boots, the radio antenna, and the windshield were out of the water. I thought, well, this Jeep is new. Hopefully the self-sealing system works to keep water out of everything. Because new vehicles, self-sealing stuff frequently needs tuning by the mechanics to work properly. Then I wondered, how long does it take to pay for a Jeep on a second lieutenant's pay? Then I realized, holy crap, this current is strong enough to keep me off my feet and could end me. I stood on this Jeep in the middle of the storm-flooded creek for about 5 minutes before I heard the roar of a tank's engines. As the tank came into view, the tank commander, TC, started laughing his back off, then leaned down and shouted something into the tank. All the hatches popped open and heads popped out with the rest of the tank crew laughing their backs off. The tank backed into the water, pulled to a stop next to the submerged Jeep, and the TC and SSG E6 said, "Okay, sir, how do you want to handle this?" "Well, Sergeant, someone needs to get in the water and attach a tow cable and pull this Jeep back to where it started." "Well, Lieutenant, nobody in this tank sank that brand new Jeep. There's the tow cable," pointing to the tow cable. So holding on to the Jeep and the tank, I got in the water, grabbed 2 cables, and then used it to connect the 2 vehicles. The tank then hauled the Jeep back to the bank where we watched water drain out of everything, including the muffler exhaust pipe. I hopped in, flipped the master switch, and the engine started immediately. "I trust, Sergeant, that you and your crew aren't going to mention this to anyone?" "Sir, of course we won't. And if you're enjoying the video with a laugh or two, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this." Story 16. About 20 years ago, I was repairing cycling trucks with those side bins used by the city of Montreal. One day, I had to repair an arm track, those that lift the bins when they're full. After finishing, I started the truck to get it out, put it in reverse, and backed up. Usually, just putting it in reverse was enough to back up without touching a pedal, so when it stopped, I thought it needed a little push. Pressed the gas pedal, and nothing happened. Stopped the truck, got out, and realized I had left the bins up in the air, so it caught the garage door. Truck was okay, the garage door not so much. It was still closed, so I said nothing and left for the night. The day after, the boss was inspecting the door with a giant V in it. To this day, I have no idea if they ever figured out who did it. I was let go a week sooner than expected for that summer job, but the boss told me it was because they had found a permanent worker. Funny note, most trucks were just patched up by kids, 18 to 25 at minimum wage with no experience. Or were at least, not safe to be around. I was a welder, not a mechanic. I did repairs that wouldn't have passed an inspection. Story 17. One Sunday morning after a long night out, I woke up with a bad hangover and bad belly aches. I realized 2 of my housemates who were living in a secluded section of the house were still on holiday, and I could use their bathroom undisturbed, which I did gladly. I'm a shy pooper. And remember, I had a lot to drink the night before, so let's just say it was going to be a messy affair. After finishing my business and feeling much relieved, I pressed a flush, expecting the shredder or pump to turn on. You see, their bathroom sits in the basement, slightly below the drainage level, which is why they have a shredder pump connected to the toilet in order to push the wastewater up through a pipe. To my dismay, nothing turned on and the water quickly started to rise and seep out of the toilet bowl. Panic set in rather quickly. Looking around to find out what the hell was going on, I noticed that the shredder's power cord had been unplugged. I thought, oh, they must have unplugged it because they're gone for the weekend. That didn't quite make sense to me, but there was no time for pondering. The situation was escalating quickly, as I already had to jump on the toilet bowl to avoid getting my feet soaked in crap water. I made the split-second decision to plug in the shredder and press the red button that came alight. Well, as I came to find out quickly, the shredder had in fact been turned off for repairs, which is why, unbeknownst to me, the exit pipe had been disconnected. A 90-degree open pipe that was now turned to smack dab face the entirety of the bathroom. Also, as it turned out, the shredder and pump worked just fine. No other way to put it. The crap, quite literally, hit the fan, and oh, how it did. The only things that did not get sprayed and doused with water were me and the wall facing my back. The rest of the bathroom, the sink, the wooden shelves with all their nooks and crannies and everything in them, the towels, the bathtub, the mirror, the shower, everything got absolutely drowned in crap. The floor is flooded. There was so much brown water, it even spilled out into the living room from underneath the bathroom door. And to top it all off, my housemates were expected to arrive back in the afternoon. I also had an unskippable work obligation, which was just a few hours away. For a brief moment, I considered faking my passing and burning the house to the ground. It was not my best day. Story 18. I was working at Walmart at the time, and I had moved from cashiering to customer service where I did the same job, but backwards. I was handling returns. The list of how to handle returns, what is and isn't considered returnable per department is practically a book. I was new, wasn't familiar with all of the ways in which something could or couldn't be returned. I was not feeling well and busy as hell. I didn't check a lawnmower for gas, which apparently was full to the brim. No managers were present other than TL, so one of them uses a tool to get the gas out. It goes in her truck. Apparently, it's a big deal, so everyone stayed quiet. People liked me and didn't want me to get in trouble for an honest mistake. The TL did wonder how I didn't smell it. It was really, really strong. I'd never had issues with my sense of smell. Normally, I'm pretty sensitive to stuff like that. Another time, I was doing money services and this guy was paying his child support. There are multiple times in which the customer confirms the amount they are paying. I confirm it verbally, the card reader asks multiple times, and it's on the receipt. This guy comes in and mumbles through the transaction. He's paying $6 for a child support. $6 what? $60? $600? It sounded like he said $600, so I asked him aloud, "You said $600? He nods and confirms it's correct. The PIN pad asks him to confirm the amount. The PIN pad tells him the total. I tell him the total verbally. It's around $603 and some change for the fee. I even emphasize on the zero in between 603. He marches back, and not even an hour later, furious because I charged him $600, not $60, even though I confirmed it so many times. But when I saw him marching back, I knew I had screwed up somehow, even though that wasn't my fault. I didn't question the amount because I've had people pay much more than that in child support, so this wasn't something I had never seen before. The problem got fixed, but I was sure I was going to get written up or something for that, but everyone was familiar with the hundreds of questions they're asked before paying and knew it wasn't on me. Story 19. I have two screw-ups that both involve cheese fondue, something I make about once a year. My family likes to celebrate New Year's with fondue. I make this by bringing white wine up to a simmer in a pot and then dropping it in handfuls of shredded cheese that I've tossed with cornstarch to thicken the sauce, stirring it all in until a nice, smooth sauce comes together. Screw up number 1. I had bought and prepped all my ingredients, shredded Gruyere and Emmental cheese coated in cornstarch, garlic, cherry, brandy, dry white wine, and nutmeg. The first handful of cheese went into the pot and immediately foamed up. This doesn't normally happen, but the foam backed down quickly, so I figured it wasn't worth worrying about and kept going. Each addition of cheese had the same effect. Worse, the sauce was not coming together at all. There was a layer of oil on top and a gloopy mess of melted cheese below that. I tasted it, hoping there would be some way to salvage it, but it was indelibly salty. I went back and checked my ingredients and only then realized that I hadn't grabbed the cornstarch but a different yellow plastic can of fine white powder, baking soda. The second screw-up happened a different year when I had thought what I thought was a brilliant idea to warm up the fondue pot before the cheese went into it. Fondue always thickens as it sits, and by the end it's tough to get any on your bread, so keeping the ceramic pot as warm as possible sounded like a no-brainer. I lit the sterno can under the empty pot and went to fetch my sauce from the stove, and as I returned, I heard a loud crack as the fondue pot split in half, knocking over the stand as it fell down and spilling burning sterno onto my tablecloth. I managed to get the fire out quickly, but the tablecloth was ruined and the surface of the table had a thumb-sized scorch mark on it. Fortunately, my neighbor owned an electric fondue pot, so we were able to enjoy our food after all, but I'll never forget the look on my wife's face when she realized what I'd done. This year, I'm letting my brother make the fondue. Story 20. So this was nearly 30 years ago. I was in my 20s and in an interview as a floral designer. The second part of the interview was creating a dried floral arrangement. All the other designers are there chatting away, working on orders, listening to the local country music station. This was back in the day when there were actual radio DJs. I listened to the station regularly, but there was one female DJ I just could not tolerate. Her voice and personality just grated on my last nerve. And I just happened to be in my interview during this DJ's radio hour. Now I'll just say I tend to verbalize my thoughts and I just blurt out, ugh, I cannot stand her voice. Radio DJ's name drives me crazy. I noticed all the designers' heads went down and the boss/owner marched out and announced that DJ is her daughter. So you can imagine I did not get hired, but a year later I received a phone call that if I'd like the job, it's mine. No way. I go, hoping beyond hope no one remembers, and nothing is said for a month or so until one day it's brought up when the boss is gone. And all the ladies are laughing, everyone but the boss remembers. I worked there for a couple of years, and to this day, as far as I know, the owner has no idea the person she hired is the one who still cannot stand the sound of her daughter's name. I bet she still gets a little shiver down her spine whenever she hears that DJ's voice on the radio. Story 21. Used borrow my doggy and looked after someone's dog a few times. I'd taken it to my brother's house, who has a secure garden. Dog was a madhead running around like crazy. He'd found some crap buried from a previous dog and was running around with it in his mouth. It was mad. I went out to the outside bin at the front of the house to check the crap, shutting the lounge door behind me, which led to the garden, and leaving the front door on the latch but closed. As I turned to go back inside, the dog went past me like a frickin' greyhound. I shouted at some kid on a bike to please help me catch the dog. The kid ditched his bike, but the dog was gone. I stopped traffic multiple times as he ran across busy roads, almost lured him in with a plastic bottle, but he had some crazed look and just darted one in reach. He ran right through the neighborhood. I was at full sprint for 5 minutes, and he eventually ran into someone's garden with a fence. 2 neighbors' gardens, a group of students having a barbecue, and some geezer came out to see what was going on. The dog proceeded to run in tight circles until it threw up, at which point the student had fashioned a leash from rope, and I took the dog home. I don't know who the heck opened the lounge door, but I fully thought the dog was going to pass away. It was truly horrendous. Biggest I have screwed up moment of my life. The owner had previously said I could take him off leash in the park, but he didn't have a very good recall. He had no recall. On the plus side, that dog got to feel a freedom I think he had been longing for a long time. He was asleep like a baby by the time she picked him up. Story 22. First restaurant job, I went to grab something out of the walk-in. There was a 20-liter Cambro of tomato sauce in front of the item I needed, and when I went to move it, it slipped and fell from the shoulder-height shelf. Hit the ground and basically made a mushroom cloud of sauce, covered me and splattered the wall, ceiling and every container in there. I froze, knew I was screwed, and opened the door. My sous chef turned mid-conversation, looked at me for about 3 seconds, and then yelled, "All hands on deck, grab rags." The whole kitchen jumped to it and stripped the fridge to start wiping down. I just started saying, "Sorry, crap, sorry," and my sous chef said, "Go get changed." I thought for sure I was fired or at least sent home, grabbed a fresh shirt and apron and came down. He walked up to me and put both hands on my shoulders and then smiled and said, "Feels freaking awful, doesn't it? But it'll happen again. It's happened to everyone." And then people took turns telling me about their colossal screw-ups. Felt so much better, and luckily we didn't eat the sauce that day. But that immediate feeling of, ugh, I cannot fix this was so bad. Story 23. I was just an innocent helper on this one, but when I was about 8, my dad, who had zero practical skills, decided he would tile the bathroom. He had some sort of instruction manual, but clearly hadn't read it through beforehand. He was just reading each step as he went along. This was the 80s, no YouTube videos. I remember we had the tiles all stacked up, we mixed the grout, laid it down, and then he read, "You have approximately 30 minutes to lay down the tiles before the grout dries." Only problem, he had failed to notice that the bathroom floor was completely irregular with lots of weird angles where it hit the sink or the tub, and all the tiles were perfectly square. I remember frantically smashing tiles and trying to do an impromptu mosaic. It came out terribly, and my dad didn't try any home improvement jobs for another 10 years or so. When he tried to fix the plumbing without turning off the water first. Story 24. Okay, so I've got quite a few, but here's one that's my favorite by my friends. It's not a screwed up story as much of a please end me so I'm embarrassed story. So I choose to go to uni outside the country. Now, in your typical fashion of an 18-year-old kid going somewhere he has never been and doesn't speak the language, I prepared for this monumental life decision by not learning one word, not even yes or no in it since I can learn it quickly. So here I go. I took a couple of flights until I get there, and all is good and dandy. A representative at the university meets me there. She speaks English, so all is good. And when we're done, we go out. She tells me to wait there until she brings a car around since a problem came up and she's flying solo, and tells me that I shouldn't move from the spot. She actually tells me that like 5 times, and I remember I even got annoyed at it. It's important to note here that I didn't have her personal info. The university and the rep were contacted by an agency, and a guy there was the one that told me there'll be someone waiting for me there, and I was like, sure. Tell them to look for a guy wearing the university t-shirt since I've got one from him, and that was that. She goes, and what do? I move from the dang spot. In my own defense, I just lit a cigarette, but a security woman came and conveyed in broken English and hand gestures that it's a no smoking area. She led me to a smoking area, and I finished my smoke, head back, and what do you know? There's like a million identical places that look exactly like the spot I was told to wait at. I waited a few minutes while trying to keep my eyes around, and I started to worry. I go looking for the security woman, which makes me even more lost, so I approach security. They don't know English. They helpfully escort me to a help desk, further taking me away from the spot. And there I am, lost in an airport, the university rep looking for me everywhere, and I'm like a lost kid in a mall. Time went by, and I got nervous and worried because I realized she might have already left because she'd wasted her day looking for me. Seriously, who'd waste time looking for an idiot that couldn't follow a "don't move from this spot" command? Time goes by, and I'm taken to a little office, and here I am, a grown man with 4 children. I'm talking toddlers, feeling the weight of my stupidity. I start getting teary-eyed, and the eldest of the children was a girl around 4 or 5. She had this stuffed pink bunny with her. She comes up to me and starts patting my arms while crying herself. I swear she was offering it to me like, "It's okay, mister, we're lost and can't find our mommies" gestures. And that's how she walks in to find me being comforted by a literal child. She takes me by the arm and drags me to the car in a stone-cold silence and wrath written on her face. She drags me to the car, not even trusting to let me go in myself, opens the door and stays put until I get in. She slammed the door closed, and we had a fun ride to the city, filled with her screaming at people and being screamed at in a language I didn't understand. And to make it all better, it turns out that the university has an office for foreign students, and the rep that escorts you from the airport is your go-to person for the period of your studies. Fun times. Story 25. I work in a remote call center for a mobile company. One time during my job, I accidentally told a customer they could still claim a free gift as long as they did it by a date in September. Turned out I had read the information on my screen wrong. The date in September was the last time they could claim it, but they had to put in the claim 30 days from the date of their purchase. The guy phoned up again after the call with myself when he realized he wasn't able to claim his free gift and complained. I ended up receiving an email from the next advisor's team leader telling me to call the customer back and apologize. It was very awkward because the free gift wasn't managed by us but by a third-party company, which made it worse. I'd basically not only given misinformation, but I'd also breached the terms of the deal arranged between the mobile company and the third-party company in doing so. Plus, because the free gift came from the third-party company, we wouldn't be able to honor it ourselves, and the third-party company wouldn't honor it either as they didn't give the customer the wrong information. It was an expensive free gift. The promotion was that you would receive a free smartwatch with a purchase of a phone. I'd cost the customer money from the free gift he couldn't get because he now had to buy a smartwatch if he still wanted it. I'd made the mobile company look bad in the customer's eyes, potentially costing us future business. And I'd also possibly ruined relations between the mobile company and the third-party company in one fell swoop. Story 26 was in the CAD lab at uni after hours. It was packed because the big assignment was due the next day. We had to make CAD models of a real-life Lego model and generate images of the model in a real-life situation. For example, Lego racing car and a real racetrack, etc. It was a lot of work because assembling a model out of Lego is a lot faster than assembling a virtual Lego model and then using Photoshop to make it look real. We had an open network at the time so you could see and even access other people's folders. So when I was trying to drag something into my folder and accidentally dragged another student's folder into mine, it was a big problem. I just heard on the other side of the room, "Huh? What's this?" in response to a warning that had popped up on her screen. All of her work vanished into the ether the day before it was due. I was so mortified, I didn't even own up until months later. On the positive side, some of her friends showed her that instead of modeling their own Lego bricks, they had just been accessing other people's folders to collect bricks and make their own models using them. They looked crap because different people had been making different levels of care with their Lego modeling, so the parts had different levels of detail. But they got very good marks, better even than me, but I was hardly in a position to complain. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.